Hey there nation, and welcome to the show where we help you to play miniatures wargaming on a budget. It is I, Commander Cheapskate, and we are back with an episode of Cheap Shots. This series is dedicated to helping you save money on your miniature wargaming projects, and on today's episode we're going to show you guys how to quickly and more importantly cheaply paint up a Hearthkyn Salvagers kill team for Warhammer 40,000's kill team. As you can see in this photo, this will be the end result that we will have using our Cheapskate method. By following the techniques as well as the materials that we suggest using really cheap craft paints and items that you usually have around your household, you could paint up this kill team to a beautiful tabletop standard as you see here for a low price of $31.57. And that of course is assuming that you're purchasing everything for the very first time. Now when you compare that for the materials that you need to purchase from both Army Painter as well as Citadel to create exactly the same effects, they're going to cost $211.50, and we're going to save you $179.93 by following our Cheapskate method. So that being said, go and sit back and relax, and let's talk about exactly how we can cheaply paint up some Hearthkyn Salvagers for Warhammer 40,000 kill team. Now the very first thing you gotta do of course is to assemble your miniatures, and you can assemble this kill team any way that you want to. For me personally, I just assembled this with the coolest looking sculpts that I could find from that box set, and the reason why is because I'm not actually using these miniatures for Warhammer 40,000 kill team. What I'm planning on using these guys for is for Ironhead Squad Prospector gang in my games of Necromunda. I thought these miniatures look really cool. They have like that really cool looking deep space salvager kind of mining vibe going on with these guys, and I thought they look a lot cooler than the Ironhead Prospectors miniatures that are available from Games Workshop. So that is what I'm using these guys for. So I'm not really sure if I have a legal list created right here with this kill team, but I just assembled the way I want to. And once you have that done, next we got to do of course is to texture our bases. Now when it comes to texturing the bases, I use a really cheap method. What I use is I use wood glue that I have lying around my house as well as sand from my backyard, and that's exactly what I use for my texturing. What I do is I cover the entire base that I want texture on it with some Elmer's wood glue that I have from my garage. I then dust it with some sand that I get from my backyard and let it dry. Now you could use of course Games Workshop's Astrogran if you want to. It does exactly the same thing we're doing here, except my process is absolutely free while the Astrogran will cost you $7.80 per pot. I don't even think you can cover an entire 10-man squad with the amount of Astrogran they give you, so you might have to buy two, but I'm not really sure because I don't really use our texture paints all that much. Now the next thing of course you got to do is put a sealant directly on the texturing that we put on the bases, and for my sealant I like to use wood glue as well as water. What I do is I make a 50-50 mixture of wood glue and water together, and it kind of makes kind of like a slurry, which is almost like the consistency of milk almost. And what I do is I just apply it like a wash all over the texturing on the bases. And the reason why I do this is because when it dries it'll create an airtight seal that will keep the texturing directly on the bases so it doesn't flake off as well. And once we're done with the drying on that part, next thing you got to do of course is to prime and start base coating. So the next step, of course, is to prime your miniatures. In my situation, I like to use Rust-Oleum flat white primer. I get a rattle can of this stuff from my local Walmart for about $3.99. I just do a quick once over with my primer directly on top of my miniatures. Now, the reason why you want to prime your miniatures is for a couple of reasons. The first reason why you want to prime your miniatures is because if you applied acrylic paint directly onto bare plastic, the surface tension is not enough to actually keep the acrylic paint onto bare plastic. So with the slightest amount of friction, that paint will just come flying right off and rubbing right off of your miniature, and it'll absolutely ruin the finish of your miniature as well. So that's where primer comes in. Primer gives a good surface for the acrylic paint to adhere to, and that's the reason why you should use it. Now a second reason why you want to use flat white primer in this situation is because it does have an overall impact on the vibrancy of the colors that you use on your miniature. Now we're going to do what's called a quick paint method, meaning that we're going to use an oil wash all over these miniatures. So that oil wash is going to really reduce the value of those colors by making them much more darker. So I'm using a white primer in order to make sure I can kind of counter that, so that way the darkening muting effect from the oil wash doesn't completely subdue the colors as well. Traditionally speaking, if you're going for a brighter paint scheme for your miniatures, you want to go with a white undercoat. If you're going with a darker paint scheme, usually a black undercoat does the job, and of course if you're looking for something that's completely neutral, you use a gray undercoat. Now of course you could use Corax white spray from Citadel, except their stuff costs $17 while flat white primer from Walmart costs $3.99, which is almost what, 5 times less, so that part's kind of nice. Now once you get done priming the miniature, the first thing you gotta do of course is start painting some of the jumpsuits that these guys are wearing. So the neat thing about these Hearthkyn is that they're wearing these really interesting jumpsuits, like space, like little environmental suits I guess you would call them, all over their pants as well as their arms. So a lot of their flesh is actually not exposed. Not to be mean about the Games Workshop sculpts for the Salvagers, not the Hearthkyn Salvagers, but for the Leagues of Votann, but I think their faces look kind of weird to me. I don't really like the way that their head sculpts look. So because of that, I don't have any of their faces exposed. I just went completely with the visor down on their helmets. I think that's a much cooler look anyways for me. That's just something I do. So because of that, there's not very much flesh on these guys. So to paint up the environmental suits, what I use is I use a thin coat, putting 2 thin coats of pewter gray by Apple Barrel Paint. You can get this stuff at your local Walmart for about 50 cents. It comes in 50-cent 2-ounce tubes. Now, if you want to do exactly the same thing from Citadel, you have to use a pot of Slanesh Gray, which costs 9 times as much at $4.55. So now that we're done base coating our miniatures, next we gotta do, of course, is a dry brush. Now, dry brushing is a neat technique, and the reason why is because it creates the illusion of depth in your miniatures. What you do is you just basically take a little bit of paint that you want to use to dry brush, you dab it a little bit on your paintbrush, you then take off as much color as you can on a piece of tissue or onto paper towel, and then what you basically do is you kind of lightly dust the surface of the miniature that you want to put the dry brushing on. What ends up happening is the individual pigments of paints will catch upon the raised surface of the miniature while leaving that darker color in the recesses. And what this creates is this highlighting effect, as well as the illusion of depth in your miniatures as well. Now, I will warn you, of course, when you do dry brushing, it's going to leave a very pastel kind of chalky texture on your miniatures. If it does bother you, do not stress out, because when we get to the oil washing phase, it's going to smooth out that transition and get rid of that dusty kind of chalky look on your miniatures as well. So the next detail we're going to focus now are on the actual visors of the helmet that these characters are wearing, as well as their boots that they're wearing as well. What I use, of course, is 2 thin layers of pavement paint by Apple Barrel. This costs 50 cents on my local Walmart. It comes in a 2-ounce tube, and I just put 2 thin coats directly on all the parts that I want to paint in black. Now, the reason why I use pavement paint is because even though pavement is a super dark gray, almost towards almost black, the reason why I like using this pavement paint is because there's actually a little bit of a texturing to this paint. So when you apply dry brushing to it, it does a beautiful job of creating that illusion of depth on the miniature as well. Now, if you wanted to use the equivalent to this from Games Workshop, you'll need to use what is called Eshin Gray, which costs 9 times as much at $4.55 for that. Now, when it comes to one of the Hearthkyn Salvagers, there's one guy who actually has bare arms being shown. I'm not sure what this guy is called on the kill team. He's the bare knuckle boxer type guy, so he has no sleeves on as well. So for this character, I want him to have a little bit more of a darker skin tone. So because I use Nutmeg Brown by Apple Barrel Paint, you get this stuff at your local Walmart for about 50 cents. I put 2 thin coats on his arms as well as his hands to give him that darker skin tone color. Now, if you want to use something like that's equivalent to this color from Games Workshop, you would need to use Bugman's Glow, which costs 9 times as much at $4.55. And once again, we're going back with the dry brushing. This time we're dry brushing the visors as well as the helmets that we paint on these characters. We're using pewter gray by Apple Barrel Paint to do those details. And as for the guy whose arms are bare, we put a thin dry brushing of Flesh by Apple Barrel Paint as well. Flesh costs 50 cents at my local Walmart. I get this in 2-ounce tubes. Just do a quick dry brushing on the arms, and you're ready to go. If you want to use exactly the same color from Games Workshop, you need to use Cadian Flesh Tone, which costs 9 times as much at $4.55 for that color. Now, going back to our bare knuckle boxer, the reason why we're singling this guy out as well is because this guy actually has a pair of mechanical legs attached to him. He's got cybernetic legs, doesn't have actually flesh colored legs. So because of that, his trousers are a little bit different than the rest of the groups, because those trousers he's wearing are actually the parts of the cybernetic leg that attach to his body, I think is what that is. So to create that color, what I use is 2 thin coats of Anita's Acrylic Taupe Gray. You can get this at your local Hobby Lobby for about 65 cents, and I just put 2 thin coats of that directly onto the miniature as well, and make that dry, and then basically create this kind of taupe kind of color with the pants that this guy is wearing for the most part to illustrate that he's wearing cybernetics. Now, you could of course use Rakarth Flesh by Games Workshop. That stuff costs $4.55, which is 7 times as much as you need as acrylic. And once you're done with that, next thing we get to now is start working on some of the more details on the body armor. Now, the largest and most significant feature of the Hearthkyn Salvagers is the armor that they wear. And I'm going to be perfectly honest, one of the cool things that kind of drew me to the Hearthkyn Salvagers and actually purchased these miniatures was the beautiful artwork that was done with these guys on the Warhammer Communities page. These Hearthkyn Salvagers wear these bright orange armor on their jumpsuits, and I thought that was really cool. It kind of sets them apart from other things that you see in the Warhammer 40,000 universe with that color. At the same time, it also gives the idea these guys are like construction workers, kind of, or salvagers in this case. So they're wearing these bright orange colors to mark them out as, like, you know, they're working in hazardous conditions, like maybe they're construction workers or something they can see easily in the dark when they're operating. So I thought it was a really eye-catching color. So to do this, what I use 2 thin layers of Apple Barrel's ripe tomato. You can get this at my local Walmart for about 50 cents. I just put 2 thin coats all over the armor panels that they're going to be wearing. So their chest rigs, their pauldrons on their shoulders, as well as some of the armor, they have some armor plates covering their legs and lower abdomen, as well as their kneecaps in some of these guys. Same thing with their gauntlets on their fists, as well as their backpacks that they're wearing as well. Same thing with the jump pack on the guy in the back. So I just picked all those layers that I wanted in 2 thin layers of ripe tomato, and I'm ready to move on with the dry brushing on their armor. Now, if you want to use the equivalent color from Games Workshop, you need to use Troll Slayer Orange, which costs $4.55, which is 9 times as much as the ripe tomato. So now that we're done with the major armor panels, next thing we got, of course, to do is to dry brush the armor panels. Now for the color I like using for this, I like using Tropic Orange or Apple Barrel Paint. It costs 50 cents. I just do a quick once over with the dry brushing on all the orange armor panels that we have on these characters. As you can see, it catches up on the right surfaces, creates these beautiful highlights that we couldn't see before from the base coating, so it makes it really, really awesome as well. Now the equivalent color to this would be from Citadel, would be Luganath Orange, which costs $4.55, which is 9 times as much as well. And now that we're done with the power armor, we can start working on some of the leather goods. So for the leather goods on these characters, we're focusing on 2 different parts of the leather goods. We're focusing on the belts that these guys have on their waists, as well as the pontoons that they're wearing upon their boots as well. I use 2 different colors for that. For their utility belts that they're wearing, I use khaki by Apple Barrel Paint. It's a nice, beautiful khaki color. It costs 50 cents at my local Walmart, and I just put 2 thin coats of this directly onto the utility belts these guys are all wearing as well. Now the color that's equivalent to that by Games Workshop is Baylor Brown, which costs 9 times as much at $4.55. As for the pontoons that they have wrapped around their boots to kind of support their ankles, I picked out 2 thin layers of Territorial Beige. This is another Apple Barrel product that costs 50 cents at my local Walmart. The color that's equivalent to that would be Baylor Brown, which costs $4.55 for that color. And I do apologize, the khaki color would actually be Morghast Bone, there we go, at $4.55, and Baylor Brown for the Territorial Beige at $4.55 as well. Now both those Citadel products are wonderful products, but they cost 9 times as much to do exactly the same thing, so I'm defaulting to the Apple Barrel Paint. So now that we're done with their leather goods, with the utility belts, as well as their boots, the next thing we gotta focus on are the weapons that these guys are carrying. And so because of that, in order to create this nice little contrasting color compared to their armor, I decided to paint up their weapons in a turquoise color because I thought it'd be a nice contrast to the orange that they're wearing for their armor as well. Plus I want to make these guys look like they're civilians, not so much like the military guys. So we're kind of straying away from like tactical looking colors for these guys to make it look like these guys are salvagers, that they're basically going out there looking for things to save. So using like civilian equipment for weapons that they normally carry, and kind of makes it look kind of cartoony, but I think it looks really nice with these colors. Now for that color I like to use is what's called Tuscan Teal. It costs 50 cents at my local Walmart. Put that in 2 thin layers all over their weapons. So the weird looking bolt gun and energy weapons that they're carrying, that huge 3-barreled minigun that the guy on the right hand side is carrying as well. Same thing with the power tube for the power fist, with the leader leading from his backpack to his power fist. I also have a guy in the background with a jump pack with a pistol as well. So all the weapons casings I picked out in 2 thin layers of Tuscan Teal. Now another color that I also worked on too is another fighter who has a lot of leather goods on him as well, and I'm not sure what this guy is called in the kill team, but this guy's got a lot of backpacks. He's got a giant shotgun sheath on his back with a shotgun looks like on. He's got a huge rucksack with a bunch of explosives and power tools hanging from it. He's also carrying a satchel with a lot of tools hanging off that as well. He's got ropes and all kinds of interesting things that are hanging off of his person. So because of that, in order to pick out those leather goods and to make them have their own individual unique look, I used 3 different colors in order to paint up those different leather goods. For the shotgun sheath on his back, I used Folk Arts Burnt Sienna. Folk Arts Burnt Sienna, you can get this at your local Walmart or your local Hobby Lobby for about 75 cents as well. So I just put 2 thin coats of that directly onto the miniature, so that way it looks really awesome. Has kind of like this interesting kind of leather worn look to it as well. Now you could of course use Games Workshop's Doombull Brown, which costs $4.55, which is about 6 times more than the Folk Art would actually cost you. Now for his actual backpack that he's wearing on his back, I use Apple Barrel Paint's Burnt Umber. Cost me 50 cents at my local Walmart. Just put 2 thin coats on his backpack, as well as the harness that he's wearing in order to create that detail as well. The Games Workshop equivalent to that would be Wildwood, which costs $7.80 for that color. And lastly, for the satchel that's on his left-hand side that has all the explosives and power tools hanging off of it, I use Anita's Acrylic Moccasin Brown, which cost me 65 cents at my local Hobby Lobby. I just put 2 thin coats of that as well. The color that's equivalent to that would be XV88 from Citadel, which costs $4.55, which I believe is 7 times as much than in the Adidas acrylic. So once you get those leather goods done with this, I don't know what you call this guy, tool or backpack guy, from there we can move on to the weapons and start dry brushing them. So for the dry brushing and all the turquoise weapons that I did, I just dry brushed it real quick in a thin dry brushing from Folk Arts Dutch Aqua. Cost me about 75 cents at my local Hobby Lobby or Walmart. So real quick dry brush directly on all the weapons, the power cabling, everything that I did in turquoise as well, so that way you can see those highlights on those weapons. Now the equivalent to this from Games Workshop would be Aethermatic Blue, which costs $7.80, which is almost 10 times more than the actual folk art is actually worth. And now that we're done with that, let's go and focus on the jump pack guy in the background. Now as for the Hearthkyn Salvagers, got a jump pack in the background. We're going to fix it on this guy, and the reason why is because his jump pack has got these two little rocket boosters that are poking out his back. Now to pick out that detail, we put in 2 thin layers of pigment paint by Apple Barrel. We used this color before. Just put 2 thin layers around the rocket boosters, so that way that detail kind of sticks out nicely for that character. Now what we're also going to do too is start picking out some of the finer details on the armor panels. Now a lot of these guys from the Hearthkyn Salvagers have these hazard stripe looking armor panels directly on top of the orange that they wear, and according to the box art as well as to the Warhammer Community's webpage, those are actually supposed to be a white looking color. So in order to create that and to give us a good solid base coat to work off of, what I did is I actually layered that in 2 thin layers of Adidas acrylic taupe gray. Now the reason why I did that is because painting white is a very difficult color to use in most cases. So in order to make it a little bit easier for myself, I used taupe gray, which is a lighter color but not exactly white, on top of the orange. That way it makes my lighter colors not have to use as many coats in order to create that same effect. So I put 2 thin coats of Adidas acrylic taupe gray, and now we're ready to go back to our lighter color to make those white hazard stripes. And the color I'm going to use to make those white hazard stripes is going to be Folk Art's Pale Gray. That cost me 75 cents at my local Walmart. It's made by Folk Art as well. The corresponding color to that would be Ulthuan Gray, which is about 7 times as much at $4.55. And the reason why I'm using this color is because going with a true white is going to be very difficult to do on these miniatures. However, Pale Gray is close enough to white, especially when we do our oil washing on these guys. After all, they're not supposed to look very pristine because these are supposed to look like guys who are out in the ash wastes or in space stations or in the Underhive salvaging things. So what's the word I'm looking for? The immaculate nature of the armor would actually degrade over time because they wouldn't have time to actually, paint it and make it look really nice and serene like it did before. So with that white being done, now we can focus on the smaller details on these miniatures. So one of the first things we did, of course, is focus on all the frag grenade or frag grenade looking type weapons that these guys are carrying. There's one guy who actually is carrying like a whole bandolier full of grenades. Same thing with the guy with all the cargo on his back. He's got a lot of explosives as well. So make those frag grenade looking things, what I decided to do is pick down 2 thin layers of holly branch. This stuff costs 50 cents at my local Walmart. It's a nice vibrant green color. I use it for a lot of the green paints that we use on this channel. It's an absolutely wonderful product. And once I put those 2 thin layers on, I'm ready to move on to a dry brush. Now, if you want to use exactly the same kind of looking color from Games Workshop, you need to buy a pot of Caliban green, which costs $4.55, which is 9 times more than the holly branch. So what we're going to do now real quick is a dry brush the grenades that these guys are carrying, and we're going to use that with Lime Sherbet by Apple Barrel Paint. You can get this at your local Walmart for about 50 cents as well. Just do a nice quick dry brushing with this Lime Sherbet, and as you can see, it kind of shows little hexagonal patterns that are on the grenades that these guys are carrying as well, which looks really awesome. The corresponding colors from this, of course, from Games Workshop would be Sabarite Green at $4.55, which is about 9 times as much. And now that we're done taking care of those frag grenades, we can start working on the metallic colors. So now we're moving on to the metallic colors, and the very first thing we're actually going to use is Folk Arts Anniversary Silver. This is actually a very vibrant and bright silver color, and the reason why we're starting off with that first, because what we're going to do is we're going to dry brush all the metallics of the helmets that these guys are wearing as well. So before, if you guys remember, we didn't actually dry brush the helmets, the pigment color we used before, and the reason why is because I want to make it look like these helmets have been kind of chipped and weathered down by the conditions of the ash wastes. So to do that, I use Anniversary Silver by Folk Art. Cost me 75 cents to do a quick dry brushing all over the domes of their helmets to make it look like it's very weathered and worn, like the chip might have been melted away or weathered away over time. Now that we're done with that, the rest of it, of course, is just normal base coating. And what we're doing here is just picking out all the metallic elements that we want to take care of. So for all the silver elements that are these guys' guns and their weaponry, I use Gunmetal Gray. Cost 75 cents at my local Walmart. Just put 2 thin layers of that over all the gunmetal silver colors they have for their weapons and the equipment they're carrying. The equivalent color to this would be Lead Belcher, which costs $7.80, which is about 10 10 times more than the gunmetal gray, and for the anniversary silver you have to use Ironbreaker, which is 10 times more at $7.80 for that color. Now for all of the gold elements that we have are things like on their belt buckles, for example, on some of the trim of their guns that they have as well, to make it look a little bit more interesting. I use 2 thin coats of Deco Arts Emperor's Gold, which costs 75 cents at my local Hobby Lobby. It's a beautiful rich golden color, and the equivalent to this from Games Workshop would be Retributor Armor, which costs 10 times as much as $7.80 as well. And the last thing we did, of course, was pick out some of the other finer details using copper as well as antique copper. Copper by Folk Art costs 75 cents. The color for that from Games Workshop would be Screaming Bell, which costs 10 times more at $7.80 for that. And then for the bronze colors that we have on their weaponry, we use Anita's Acrylics Aged Copper, which costs 65 cents at my local Hobby Lobby. The equivalent to this would be Brass Scorpion from Games Workshop, which costs $7.80, which is 10 times as much. So you just look for these details that you want to have painted on the metallic colors and apply it accordingly. So things like the rocket packs that they're wearing, for example, the power packs that they have, close combat weapons they have with power picks and such, things like little iconography on their armor. The knuckle dusters as well as the power picks these guys are carrying, the iconography in their armor, the little light bulbs they have on their power armor as well, the pins of the grenades, the magazine wells, whatever accent colors you want to add to those metallic colors, you just go ahead and do so. And once you're done with that, we can move on to our last bit of final details before our oil wash. So the last few elements we're going to work on are things like the actual eye screens, the goggles for their helmets, as well as some of the little buttons that they have on their gauntlets. Now as for the visors on their helmets, I picked out 2 thin layers of Mermaid Blue by Delta Serum Coat. I get this on my local Hobby Lobby for about 65 cents. The color equivalent to this would be Talisar Blue by Games Workshop, which costs over 10 times as much as $7.80. I just pick out those visors and 2 thin layers of that Mermaid Blue to kind of create this kind of like visor look that's going on with their helmets. Now if you'll notice on these guys' gauntlets, they also have like large buttons and stuff, and like buttons and lights on their gauntlets. For that I use just lime sherbet, just picked out on 2 thin layers of that, and the reason why is because that color contrasts so nicely against the orange. And so once I picked out those details, we can start working on the bases. So when it comes to the texture of the bases, I put 2 thin layers of pewter gray directly onto the base as well. Just paint all that texturing that's on that base to make it look like it's part of the ash waste with that grimy kind of burnt out, contaminated look. Now if you'll notice, a lot of the white undercoat is still picking through the pewter gray, and that is perfectly fine. And the reason why is because we're going to dry brush these bases with pale gray anyways, so you're not going to notice it. So once again, we're going to dry brush the bases with a thin layer of pale gray by Folk Art. Just do a real quick once over all over the texture on the bases. And like I said before, as you can see from this photo, the white undercoat that poked through the pure gray, you really can't tell because the pale gray does a beautiful job of highlighting that and creating that illusion of depth, and also adding that really burnt out wasteland look on the bases that we're going for. So now that we're done dry brushing the bases, the next step is our oil wash, because this is a quick paint method. Alright, so we're going to do a quick oil wash now for our quick paint method, because how it works with the quick paint method is that you do all your base coating and your dry brushing first, and then you use one color to act as your oil wash all over the miniature. Now traditionally what people like to use to do this step is Army Painter Strong Tone. Now Army Painter Strong Tone does exactly what it does advertised. It's a wonderful product. It does stain up your miniatures. It also adds that beautiful dark color to the color contrast. It also makes all that wash really, really simple. However, it does cost $32 per can, so it is quite pricey. The better equivalent to that would be Midwax Polyshade and Mission Oak color that you get your local Walmart for $6.99. It's about 5 times less than the Army Painter Strong Tone, and it does exactly the same thing. Now the oil washing does a couple of things for us. The first thing that it does, of course, is, as you can see here, is that it brings out a lot of the recesses and a lot of the details and recesses that we couldn't see before. Things like the joints between the different armor panels, the texturing on the bases, the fold of the fabric that we couldn't see before, the actual musculature of the miniature. So that oil wash does a good job of seeping directly into the recesses and bringing those details out with that dark stain, which is really nice as well. The second thing that the product also does too, if you'll notice, it also mutes the vibrancy of the colors that we used before. The reason why we use such bright colors in the earlier dry brushing and base coating stages is because this oil wash is going to stain those colors and bring that color down in value. And that's the reason why I use such bright colors before. So as you can see, it's more of like a mid-tone look with those oranges going on as well. And the last thing that this oil wash does too is it also smooths out the transitions between our dry brushing as well as our base coating. As you can see, that pastel kind of chalky texture that these miniatures have are now completely gone because it smoothed out the color transitions between our dry brushing and our base coats, and also kind of blend those colors together as well. Now, there is something to be said about this. You do have to let this stuff dry and cure for about 24 hours, and the reason why is because there is polyurethane in the mid-wax poly shade, just like it is in the Army Painter Strong Tone. The nice thing about that, of course, you'll have a nice clear coat shell on the outside of your miniatures that will protect your paint job from being weathered, worn, or from fading, which is going to be kind of nice as well. The only drawback, of course, is going to be quite glossy, so that is something you have to worry about as well. So just wait 24 hours for this stuff to dry and cure, and then when you guys are done, move on to your guys' next step. So this is actually taking 24 hours later. The last thing I do, of course, I put 2 thin coats of Folk Arts Skyline directly onto the base. It's a beautiful grayish blue color I use for all the Necromunda miniatures in the Studios collection. This cost me 75 cents at my local Walmart. The color equivalent to this would be Rust Gray by Games Workshop, which costs $4.55, which is about 6 times more than the Folk Art does. Now, this very last step, of course, is completely optional to you. What you can do, as of course, is to put a matte varnish directly on these miniatures. I haven't done that yet in this photo because, as you can see, this photo, these guys are quite glossy. And the reason why they're kind of glossy that way is because of the polyurethane that's in the mid-wax poly shade. Now, if you're a fan of that sheen from the candy coated look from that oil wash, you can skip the next step, which is spray varnish. However, though, I like a matte finish on my miniatures, so what I do is I'm going to buy a can of Krylon matte varnish spray. I'm going to spray it directly all over the miniatures to mute them down a bit. It costs $5.99 on my local Walmart to do that. If you want to do exactly the same thing from Games Workshop, you'll need to buy a rattle can of Minotaurian varnish, which costs $19.50, almost more than 4 times as much as a Krylon matte varnish spray. So as you can see in this photo, I put that matte varnish spray on these guys. You can see that sheen has been muted down, and this is what the end result would look like for your Hearthkyn Salvagers. We got a beautiful tabletop standard. These guys look grimy, they look dirty, they look like they're weathered and worn, and they look like they're ready to bring out profit and pride, as well as warfare on the mean ash waste or in the depths of the Underhive as well. So these guys look really, really awesome. So that being said, let's go and talk about exactly the materials that you need to purchase from both Citadel as well as Army Painter if you want to do exactly the same thing we did with our miniatures, but using their materials instead. So these are the materials you need to purchase from Army Painter as well as Citadel if you want to do exactly the same thing with your miniatures as we did with ours, but using these name brand products. What you need to do is buy a can of Corax White Spray, which costs $17, as well as pots of Thunderhawk Blue, Caliban Green, Lumineth Orange, Cybrite Green. All those cost $4.55. You need to buy a pot of Wildwood, which costs $7.80, as well as Bugman's Glow, Cadian Fleshstone, Morghast Bone, Baylor Brown, Slanesh Gray, Eshin Gray, Troll Slayer, all those costing $4.55 for those. You'll then need to buy a pot of Talisar Blue, which costs $7.80, XV88, which costs $4.55, same thing with Rakarth Flesh. You also need to buy Brass Scorpion, Lead Belcher, Screaming Bill, and Ironbreaker. All those metallic colors cost $7.80. You need to buy a pot of Rust Gray for $4.55, as well as Doombull Brown and Ulthuan Gray. And you also need to buy Aethermatic Blue, as well as Retributor Armor, which costs $7.80 for those. You'll then need to buy a can of Army Painter Strong Toe, which costs $32 for that, a can of Minotaurian Varnish that costs $19.50, as well as Astrogranite for the texture, which costs $7.80. Now, assuming that you're purchasing all these Citadel as well as Army Painter products for the very first time, you're talking about a grand total investment of $211.50 to paint up your squad of Hearthkyn Salvagers the same way we did, except by using Citadel and Army Painter products. Now, when you combine that against the Cheapskate method, which only costs us $31.57 to paint up this, to do exactly the same thing, you end up with a grand total savings of $179.93. And based on these inflationary times, that is a steal and a lot of money to be saved as well. So there you guys have it. That's how you go about painting it, the Cheapskate method versus the Citadel method. So there you guys have it. What do you think? This is what the end result looks like with our Hearthkyn Salvagers using our Cheapskate method. As always, please feel free to comment, like, and or subscribe. Your guys' input is invaluable to us as always. Also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, as well as blogging.com for all the latest greatest hobby news related to this channel. That's good for listening, guys. I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace out and stay classy.